This is the Vic Feazell Show podcast, hosted by Vic Feazell and Jonathan Zimick, sponsored by Moroso Wood-Fired Pizzeria and Pinewood Coffee Roasters.
As long as I was going after the crooks that didn't have badges, I was everybody's hero.
Says he has killed 100 women.
Lucas, who claims to have killed over 150 women,
confirmed his involvement in more than 200 murders.
Henry Lee Lucas killed at least 360 people around the country during an 8-year spree that only ended when Texas authorities caught him last year.
What a clip.
What a clip. Wow, Jonathan. And that is the very environment, that was the attitude, that was the climate in the media that we were up against when we first started saying, hey, put the brakes on.
Right.
Henry Lucas couldn't have possibly killed 100, 200, 300, 400, 500.
Keep going.
600.
Oh!
600 people. There is no way. And this was in the media all the time.
Right.
Every time you turn on the TV, the tally was going up of the number of people, primarily women,
right,
that Henry Lee Lucas had murdered.
Right.
So then on April the 11th, 1985, April 11th, 1985.
Before I was even born.
Before you were born,
you were
Jonathan.
changing the world.
Before most of our listeners were born. I bet you more than 50% of our listeners were born before April 1985.
Sure.
But that's when this kicked off. April 1985, the McLennan County grand jury convened to probe confessions of Henry Lee Lucas to 3 local murders. Witnesses included Hugh Ainsworth.
Yeah, who we've heard from. And if you go to YouTube, there's a number of videos from our interview with him up.
They are. So go to YouTube, look at our interviews. Jonathan, you've done a hell of a good job editing those interviews, putting in photographs, putting in old video. They're very entertaining. They're almost documentary style interviews.
Right.
So Hugh Ainsworth, and then McLennan County Sheriff's Deputies Gilbreth, Ludke, Elijah Dickerson, and Billy Rich all testified before our grand jury on the first day, on April 11th, 1985.
So let me ask you this. What did those sheriff's deputies have to say? Were they the ones who first shot or had the first crack at interviewing Lucas?
They're the ones who had their first crack at interviewing Lucas.
Gotcha.
Sheriff Gilbreth is the one who interviewed him originally. Deputy Gilbreth owned Dorothy Collins.
Right.
And he came back and said, it's my opinion, Lucas had nothing to do with these cases. And then later, Boutwell and Prince resubmit those cases to some different sheriff's deputies. I believe that was Deputy Dickerson. And Lucas told it right that time. And he says, hey, we've got a killer here.
Wow.
So we had these 2 sheriff's deputies, one who heard a confession one way, and then one who heard it after it had been cleaned up.
Right.
I think we've got some good footage, some news clips of the McLennan County grand jury being impaneled that we may splice in here.
The special grand jury in Waco is looking into 2 murders that happened in McLennan County, one in 1977, another in 1981. It's also investigating what methods were used to get Henry Lee Lucas to confess to those murders.
I can't talk about what the grand jury is thinking or feeling right now or what's being presented to them, but my office definitely has been suspicious of at least those 2.
April 1985 was a busy month. We crammed 5 or 6 months into that month, into April. April the 12th, 1985, application for bench warrant. And a bench warrant is a legal document that's signed by a court to bring a prisoner from a different jurisdiction to your jurisdiction.
Right.
So an application for a bench warrant was filed with McLennan County District Clerk Joe Johnson.
Right.
It was signed by Vic Feazell and by Attorney General Jim Maddox.
All right.
Yay. Judge George Allen of the 54th District Court signed the accompanying order. Our evidence for that is copies of the application and copies of the order signed by Judge Allen.
Right.
And you can find those on our website if you want to go look, vicfeazell.com. Evidence of the grand jury convening. Hey, we have a Waco Tribune-Herald article. That's back when they used to still cover us, Jonathan. April the 12th of 1985. An article about our April the 11th grand jury coming together. You know, it's still amazing to me that the Waco Tribune-Herald would cover every single day of our grand jury, would cover everything about Henry Lucas, covered every trial I ever did. But then when Netflix came along...
Yeah, not a peep out of them.
They did 5 episodes.
Not a peep.
Not a peep.
Oh, well.
Not a peep.
Do you know
this
who did
day...
What's that?
Not to this day. Not a peep.
But you know what, man? Do you know who did do articles? Everybody else.
Everybody else. Everybody else. I'm telling you, I'm so disappointed with the Tribune-Herald. I won't even let my parakeet poop on it anymore.
Oh, that's just sad.
I'm just using paper towels now.
It'd be even sadder if you had a parakeet.
Yeah,
who has birds?
Yeah, who has birds?
That's funny. So things progress then, is what you're saying. So April 11th, April 12th, things are moving fast.
Things are moving so fast. We brought the grand jury in on the 11th. They were sworn in, and we heard 4 witnesses.
Boom. And then next day, you're trying to get Lucas.
The very next day, and I think we have some film of this on YouTube if you want to go look at it, showing Sheriff Jack Harwell and Dan Weinberg bringing back Henry Lee Lucas to McLennan County. They went down there to Georgetown armed with this warrant, this bench warrant from Judge George Allen, signed by me and Texas Attorney General Jim Maddox. And they said, give us Henry.
Give him to us.
Oh, my God, they were upset.
They were not pleased.
They were so upset. It was a standoff there. Jack Harwell told me he didn't know how it was going to end. And finally, Jack just told Sheriff Boutwell, okay, just tell me you're not going to comply with this court's order and I'll go home.
Right.
They went in, had another little 10-minute session, him and the DA, Ed Walsh, who we'll hear from later.
Yeah, we have some good sound clips from him.
We do. He really enjoyed badmouthing me and Maddox.
He did.
Oh, they're just trying to keep the truth from coming out.
Yeah.
All we cared about was the truth coming out. Well, they've taken him away from law enforcement. Well, we were law enforcement. We were taking him away from dirty law enforcement.
Right.
So then on April the 12th...
Well, let me ask you a quick one, Vic.
Yeah.
When you impaneled the grand jury on the 11th, did you know right off the bat you're going to be getting Lucas? Did you go into it going, hey, we need to get Lucas,
yes,
but let's just get the grand jury going, and then we'll kind of surprise it?
Yes.
Okay.
We knew we had to have Lucas. I had already talked to Jim Maddox. Matter of fact, I'd been to Austin to visit with him a couple times.
Oh.
My first visit down there, when I walked in and told him about all of this, and I thought he would be surprised, and he wasn't.
Oh, geez.
He said, yeah, I've been hearing something about that. And I didn't ask him. I knew better because he wouldn't up his sources. He was that kind of guy.
Yeah.
But I found out later from his source who it was. It was
Hugh, wasn't it?
It was Hugh. It was Hugh Ainsworth, who had already been to Jim Maddox and told him there are real problems with this case.
Yeah.
Hugh is the one who spoke with George Bush about it and was ultimately able to get the stay of execution on Henry Lee Lucas.
Right.
And then later get his death sentence commuted to a life sentence.
Right.
Because everybody with any sense knew that Henry Lee Lucas had not committed orange socks. So we had a very busy April 11th and April 12th. Also on April the 12th, that's when Henry was removed from the Williamson County Jail and brought to McLennan County. Present at the time in Georgetown were Clemmy Schroeder.
Yeah, Sister Clemmy.
We've talked about Sister Clemmy before. She's in the Netflix The Confession Killer. If you haven't watched it, watch it. Jim Boutwell was there. Bob Prince, Texas Ranger Prince.
Right.
Ed Walsh.
Yep. which he was the one who was overseeing the Orange Sox case.
He was the district attorney of Williamson County, which is Georgetown, Texas,
right,
which is also where the task force had their home.
Yay.
Right there in the Georgetown jail.
Williamson County District Attorney Ed Walsh today criticized the way a special McLennan County grand jury is probing into Henry Lee Lucas's past. Lucas has recanted his confessions to more than 300 murders across the country. Walsh did not leave District Attorney Vic Feazell or Attorney General Jim Maddox unscathed in his attack.
Williamson County District Attorney Ed Walsh, who prosecuted Lucas last year for his capital murder conviction, says information given to authorities by Lucas were all confirmed. Walsh says he disagrees with the way the investigation is currently being handled in Waco, especially by Maddox and Feazell.
I'm here today to respond to what I feel is irresponsible actions, unprofessional actions on the part of not only Jim Maddox, but also District Attorney Vic Feazell.
It is Walsh's suggestion that Feazell should not have gone to a grand jury, but should have taken his evidence to the Texas Ranger Task Force.
And then Jack Harwell and Chief Deputy Dan Weinberg.
Right.
And Weinberg had gone with Jack Harwell to pick up Lucas.
Right.
And our evidence of that is the statement of Clemmy Schroeder. And the statement was given to, where's our sound effects? Boom, boom, ba-boom, boom, ba-boom. Greg Rampton, FBI agent Greg Rampton. She gave a statement to Greg Rampton on April the 19th about the April the 12th meeting. Can also be found in my deposition, exhibit number 14, my deposition to the Belo
right
stuff. And we're going to have all that on our website eventually. Hopefully someday we'll have every piece of paper, every document on our website. Maybe not all of it will be public. Some of it we're going to limit to Friends of the Fort.
There we go.
And we're going to get that going hopefully in a month or so, where Friends of the Fort can come in and look at all the numerous documents we already have posted.
Right. And all the cool video and whatnot that we have.
And the cool video, because we have tons of it. Just about everything that was on Netflix, they got from us.
Truth.
Because we had been saving it for years and years and years. Well, this was the first appearance of Greg Rampton, April the 12th, 1985. And that's when he took the statement from, April the 19th, 1985. And that's when he took the statement from Clemmy Schroeder.
Right.
About the April the 12th afternoon meeting where we took Henry away from him.
Right.
The FBI was never interested in Henry before. Not until we brought him to McLennan County. He had been questioned 1,000 times by police officers without an attorney in the room, with Boutwell and Prince telling him, you don't need a lawyer.
What do you need that for, Henry?
Just talk to us, Henry. Just keep talking. You don't need a lawyer. They were violating his civil rights every way you could think of. But then when we got Henry away from him, suddenly,
you were the violators.
We were the violators.
Violations.
They started pointing the finger at us. Counter accusations.
Yeah.
That's part of what the deep state does. They make counter accusations. Whatever you say they're doing, why, they'll turn right around and accuse you of it.
Right.
If you don't believe me, watch the report on Amazon.
Right.
Watch The Confession Killer and see what they did to me. They turn around, they start making the exact allegations against you.
Crazy.
So then on April the 14th, 1985, that's when the Dallas Times-Herald published the Lucas hoax story.
The big Hugh Ainsworth story.
Hugh Ainsworth and Jim Henderson saying that Lucas had only killed 3 people and detailing Lucas's whereabouts during his reported crime spree.
Right.
So Hugh and Jim had these documents placing Henry all over the country.
Right.
You know, even the Deborah Sue Williamson case, the one in Lubbock, Bob and Joyce Lemon's daughter.
Right.
That was only within a day or two of him getting out of prison in Maryland.
Right.
We have video of Mike Ferry from the AG's office and Bob Lemons, who went with him because Bob had already spent his personal life savings chasing all these things down to prove that Henry Lucas had not murdered his stepdaughter, Deborah Sue Williamson.
Right.
So we have video of them talking with Lucas's wife, a lady named Betty Crawford.
Right.
And say, no, we picked Henry up from prison. He stayed with us. He stayed with so-and-so.
Or he
stayed with so-and-so.
He took a bus is what it was. He got out of prison, took a bus directly to their place. It's like he got out on a Friday. He was at their place via bus Saturday.
There you go. That's what it was. So there's no way that he was in Lubbock.
No way.
2 days later.
No way.
Killing Deborah Sue Williamson. And Bob knew this. And so Bob is in these interviews. So check back to the website later. We'll have maybe some of these interviews posted.
And there's some clips in here
some
too
of the
for
clips. So Hugh was going to publish this article before our grand jury started.
Right.
You know, we found out about what Hugh was doing, and Hugh found out what we were doing, and we got together.
Yeah. You got to coordinate that attack.
We did. And that's when Jim Maddox and I asked Hugh, see what you can do. We talked with the editors also at the Dallas Times-Herald and said, please, don't publish this until we get Henry away from the task force. Because if you publish this article first, we'll never get him.
Right.
So they waited until till the 14th. We had gotten Henry away from them on the 12th. So we got him away on the 12th. Then there was the 13th. And then they posted that big 2 or 3 page article on the 14th showing that Lucas couldn't possibly have killed all these people. And I believe we have copies of that article on our website.
If not, we'll put it up.
If not, we'll put it up. But I think it's already
episode
there, attached to the interviews of Hugh Ainsworth.
Oh, cool.
So check that. If not, Jonathan, put that up.
Yeah, we'll put it in this episode too.
So when that article hit, it started raising questions all over the country from law enforcement. Do we have the right person on this? Are we sure that we have the right killer? So on April the 14th, the Los Angeles Times quotes 2 officials in California saying, 2 of our 15 murders attributed to Lucas and cleared probably weren't committed by him.
Oh, man.
So in less than a day after Hugh's article appeared, they had already knocked out 2 of their 15.
And that's great that people out there in California were taking Hugh's article serious and were able to say, hey, man, thanks for doing that research. Clear him. You know, get him out. Reopen these bad boys.
And that was the day after, and there were only 2 of the 15 that they were saying we didn't think he did.
Right.
Now I think it's all 15 of the 15 that have been reopened.
Yeah, man.
But closer to home, they weren't feeling the same way. The San Antonio Light published an article on the 15th, the very next day, saying that Bexar County officials stand behind the Lucas confessions to the murders of several local women, despite reports by the Dallas Times-Herald. Now, I wonder who got to these guys that they were going to say, we don't care what the facts are. All right, well, Hugh Ainsworth has paperwork proving this guy was in Jacksonville, Florida when this murder was committed, but we still don't believe it. You know, it makes me wonder.
Oh, it's got to make you wonder.
Sheriff Jim Boutwell, a member of the Texas Ranger Task Force, says he is convinced Lucas is responsible for 210 murders. I wonder where he got that figure.
Yeah, actually, where did he get that figure?
Boutwell says Lucas knows his confessions are delaying his trip to death row. Director Jim Adams.
Yes, your friend.
We need another Darth Vader march here. Jim Adams, boom, 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 of the DPS, parent agency of the Texas Rangers, says reports that authorities ignored evidence are ludicrous.
Huh.
and that from the beginning, Lucas has provided both reliable and unreliable information, which has been made known to police agencies involved. Well, that's not true. That's totally not true. They had the police agencies mail in their files
Right.
before they could ever even talk to Lucas.
Right.
Then Boutwell or Prince would talk to Lucas, show him the file, and then contact the local agency to come down.
Right.
I don't blame a lot of these local people who come down and say, oh my God, he told us things only the killer could know.
Right.
Because to them, he was. They didn't know he had seen the file.
Jeez.
So.
Well, one thing I find interesting that Adam said here is that he did provide both reliable and unreliable information, but it seems like they didn't care about the unreliable. They only wanted the reliable, and they would twist what was unreliable into being reliable.
Exactly.
You know, so he right there admits, you know.
This is just Adams covering his own butt.
Yeah.
Just in case there's one or two you could say Henry didn't really commit, he's covering his own butt here.
Yeah.
He learned to do that with J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah.
This weekend, I watched the movie J. Edgar.
Yay.
First time I've seen it. It's a 2011 movie.
Mm-hmm.
Really good movie, man.
Pretty decent. Leonardo DiCaprio.
Leonardo DiCaprio. I really like him. It was directed by Clint Eastwood, though. And Clint Eastwood, you know, is a real NRA, conservative,
yes,
Obama empty chair kind of guy, you know. And he glossed over a lot of the problems with J. Edgar Hoover.
Sure.
A lot of the rights violations. Even what he did to Martin Luther King was kind of glossed over and even sort of justified. Yeah. Oh, well, he may have had communist leanings. Oh, give me a break. Hoover was just a racist.
Right.
And a lot of the people that followed after him were racist. And Colonel Jim Adams learned at the feet of J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah.
And J. Edgar Hoover would defend the reputation of the FBI at any price, no matter who he had to fire, no matter who he had to investigate, no matter who he had to ruin, no matter who he had to threaten and even encourage to commit suicide like he did Martin Luther King.
Right.
And Jim Adams is the same way about the DPS. Once he exported all of that FBI BS to Texas, then he started that with the DPS and the Texas Rangers.
True.
And when I stood up and said that I felt like that they were operating in an unethical manner in the way they were doing the Lucas confessions, oh my God, that's when he totally came after me.
Well, today Attorney General Maddox said that he thought that even though there may be something there, that the whole investigation began because of the Lucas thing. Do you still maintain there was no connection whatsoever?
Absolutely no connection. I think the Attorney General's comments are uncalled for. At the time he first made them, he admitted that he didn't know the facts. He still doesn't know the facts. And if he did know them, he would know that there's absolutely no relationship whatsoever between the Lucas investigation and our initiation of this investigation.
Now, on April the 15th, 1985, here again, we're still in April 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, the Houston Post published a UPI story concerning the Dallas Times-Herald article. It quotes me as saying, McLennan County prosecutors in October 1984 began probing the Lucas confessions to the murders of Dorothy Collins and Glenn Parks. The Post quotes Vic as saying he met with Maddox in January and that Maddox was already aware of holes in the story.
Right.
Well, that was his meeting with Hugh Ainsworth.
Right.
But an important date here is October 84.
Right.
We started looking off into this in October 1984. Now, Jim Adams, head of the DPS, former deputy director of the FBI, as they usually do, whenever anybody would point the finger at them, they point the finger back and start making counter accusations.
Right.
And that's what he immediately started doing to me. Well, we've been investigating Feazell. But he didn't start that until April.
Right. Well,
April
not
of
until,
1985.
Yeah.
Well, it says here in this article that we have been looking off into them as far back as October of 1984.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing is, even though Adams claims that they had been investigating me before I was looking at them, there's no proof of that.
Right.
There's not a memo, not a note, not a travel voucher, not anything.
Yeah. They weren't looking into you, Vic.
They weren't.
They weren't.
And Ron Border, the intelligence officer for Colonel Jim Adams, the one who was in charge of investigating me,
right.
Even when Ned Butler approached him, Ned Butler was my assistant working on the Lucas case. When he approached Border in late 1984 to let him know what we were doing and asked Border if he would help us, Border says, "Oh, I can't. No, I can't investigate any public official unless we have written approval from the director."
Right.
Well, the director is Colonel Jim Adams.
Right.
That I had to have written approval to investigate me.
And there was no written approval.
There was zero, zip. There was nothing in my file until April 1985. And even then it doesn't say, "Oh, this is that guy we were investigating."
Right.
No, it says, "This crazy DA in Waco is looking into the task force and is looking to give us a bad name." So anyway, our evidence on the Houston Post is an article dated April the 15th, 1985.
Right.
Also on April the 15th, 1985, I got a phone message from a guy named Floyd Hacker.
Who's Floyd Hacker?
Floyd Hacker. He worked for DPS.
Oh.
He was right under Colonel Jim Adams. He was one of their top guys. He writes a DPS interoffice memo to Colonel Adams, and it states, "After receiving information that Vic Feazell, District Attorney, McLennan County, Waco, Texas, was making allegations against the Rangers in their handling of the Henry Lee Lucas investigation and acting on your, Adams' instructions, I attempted to contact Mr. Feazell to set up an appointment to discuss the allegations of Mr. Feazell." And we've got that memo.
Yeah.
We've got that memo, and it's in our files. DPS interoffice memo from open records request, dated April 15th, 1985. And even Floyd Hacker. And if you go and look at the arrest photo of me, Floyd Hacker is the guy who's standing off to my right. Tall, slim, mostly bald. That was Floyd Hacker.
Trippy.
So he had called me on April 15th. I did not call him back. I got to plead guilty to that. I didn't, because I didn't know what to tell him.
Well, yeah, and frankly, you were doing the Lucas grand jury. You had your hands full.
I had my hands full. We were right in the middle of it. The grand jury had already been started. But an interesting thing about Floyd Hacker's memo, the same as Ron Border's memo, is it doesn't mention anything about, "Oh, this is that guy we're already investigating.
Right.
Now he's coming after us." No. That was a total retrofit.
Right.
Retrofit to try to say they were looking at me before I was looking at them. Man, during this time, I started being bombarded by all kinds of false press, false allegations, all kinds of stuff from the DPS.
Right.
On April the 16th, 1985, the Dallas Morning News published a story by David Hanners in which Bob Lemons, and Bob Lemons, we've mentioned, was the stepfather of Deborah Sue Williamson.
Right.
And Bob Lemons is quoted as saying he'll hold a news conference on April the 16th in Lubbock to prove that Lucas was in Maryland when his stepdaughter was killed.
Right.
And that's what Betty Crawford confirmed.
Yeah, Lucas's wife
wife. Lucas had confessed to the stabbing of Deborah Sue Williamson. But Jim Adams was also going to have a news conference on that same day to discuss the Lucas case. And that's where he uses the word ludicrous. It's just ludicrous to think that anybody would challenge our investigation of Henry Lee Lucas.
Jeez.
Texas Ranger Bob Prince is quoted in the same story as saying that in his opinion, in excess of 100 cases, Lucas led officers to the crime scene.
Yeah, okay.
Well, we know that's not true.
That is false. Totally
Lucas
false.
never led anyone to a crime scene. Matter of fact, somewhere, maybe we can insert it into this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
There's a clip where Bob Lemons had been allowed to listen to the confession of Henry Lucas.
Right.
And he was also able to listen to the law enforcement officers drive Lucas by his house.
Right.
Turn around, drive by his house again. Anything look familiar? You sure it doesn't look familiar? How about this house? How about up in there?
Maybe you want to check out this house, Henry.
Maybe check out that house.
How about that one? Should we go by it again?
The district attorney, Jim Bob Darnell in Lubbock, allowed us to see Deborah's file, allowed us to hear the tape where Henry supposedly directed George White and Jackie Peoples to the scene. This didn't happen. Henry Lucas never told them one direction. They took him to the house and insisted that he must know about it.
The Lemons made a written transcript of the tape. That transcript indicates detectives stopped in front of Deborah's house on 82nd Street, and Lubbock detective George White asked, "Does that look familiar?" Lucas replied, "I don't know." The car then turned left and stopped on the Avenue L side of Deborah's house, and White asks, "Do you want to look at that one again?" Lucas replied, "I guess it won't hurt to." White, "Turn around and go back to that one." The car turns around and drives back to Deborah's house. White asks, "You want to look at this one here?" Lucas replies, "Well, yeah, it looks familiar. It was whiter than that and had a porch. That changed, I guess. But at the time of the murder, the house was green."
If that's what they're talking about, leading someone,
yeah.
Well, who's leading whom?
Yeah.
This was the police and the Texas Rangers leading Lucas. He never led anyone to a murder case anywhere unless he led Phil Ryan to Becky.
Right.
And
we'll leave that
my
one open.
heart's jury is still out on that. Although I'm really kind of pissed at Phil Ryan for the things he said about me on Netflix.
Yes.
In spite of the evidence, in spite of the truth, in spite of everything we've got, for him to say the things he said on Netflix.
It's mean.
It's mean, and it makes me doubt his veracity.
Yeah.
And it makes me doubt whether Lucas really led him to these bones or had those bones already been discovered.
Right.
Because when I spoke to Henry Lucas about it, he said they drove me by this field. They slowed way down. There were survey sticks out in the ground. So I said, "Stop here." And I walked over to where the survey sticks were.
Right.
And that the bones had already been identified.
Wow.
Not identified as Becky's, but had already been found.
Gotcha.
And as far as identifying them as Becky's, I still have real concerns there about the way the lab work was done.
Sure.
That there wasn't any DNA done. That there were a lot of corners that were cut and a lot of shortcuts. And the problem that they went in telling the pathologist, "We believe these bones are a 15, 16-year-old girl. We believe these are Becky Powell," just like with Kate Rich. The defendant told us these are human bones that he incinerated. Oh, okay, right. Human bones. Why bother running a test? Right. He confessed. Case closed. It's a cognitive bias, and that's a problem with a lot of law enforcement. Is the cognitive bias that's inserted. On April the 16th of 1985, the Lubbock Avalanche Journal published an Associated Press wire story, datelined Austin, which quotes Jim Maddox as saying, "He does not believe that Henry Lucas committed all the hundreds of slayings to which he confessed." Whoa, that made Jim Adams really mad.
Oh, of course it did.
We have a clip somewhere where Jim Adams says that
he doesn't appreciate Jim Maddox's comments.
Yes, he shouldn't have made those comments. I don't appreciate the Attorney General's comments.
Yeah.
I think the Attorney General's comments are uncalled for.
And then on 4/16, and keep in mind here, we're still talking about 1 week.
Yeah.
The 11th through the 16th. Clemmy Schroeder leaves Georgetown to visit Henry Lee Lucas in Waco after being told on April the 15th that she could see him at 8 o'clock that morning. That was me. I told her she could come visit him. And on 4/16, she shows up. She arrives at the McLennan County Jail to see Henry. She reports seeing Hugh Ainsworth while waiting in the DA's office. She didn't like Hugh Ainsworth then.
Right.
Yeah,
she was still under the power of the Rangers.
She was still under their power, yeah. Now, she likes Hugh now because she's figured out that everything he said was the truth.
Right.
She doesn't care for Boutwell and Prince now because she figured out everything they were telling her was a lie.
Yeah. Jeez.
But she saw Ainsworth at the courthouse, and that made her mad. That made her mad at me. She met with me, and she learned that Henry would be talking to the grand jury the next day, and that he was going to say he had not killed anyone.
Boom.
Except his mother.
Mama.
Just mom. And the evidence of that is Schroeder's tape-recorded statement to Boutwell.
Oh, Boutwell was right there. What'd you learn?
Who'd you talk to? She went back that night, sat down, and Boutwell tape-recorded everything she said.
Right.
And then started disseminating some of her quotes out of context.
Of course.
To certain radio talk shows around the country. This one in particular, this crazy preacher named Bob Larson. I think he was out of Colorado.
Meanwhile, the Williamson County Sheriff, Jim Boutwell, was in Waco today interviewing Lucas.
He comes up here, Boutwell does, goes in to see Lucas without a lawyer, questions him. Then we find out later that he tape recorded the entire conversation.
Boutwell refused to give Feazell the tape or a copy of it.
It's my intention at this time to subpoena him and his tape recording before I have to listen to pieces of it over the radio or TV after it's been worked on or spliced. I'm not going to put up with that.
And they all wanted to believe that Henry was this big mass murderer, this big serial killer that they had brought to the Lord.
Right.
Jesus' new convert.
Oh, boy.
And if he wasn't a big mass murderer, well, then he was just a new convert.
Right.
Isn't near as exciting.
Nowhere near exciting.
No. Ha! So then on April the 16th, Jim Adams again, the director of the Department of Public Safety, he held a news conference in Austin saying it's ludicrous. There's that word again. He loved that word. To believe that Henry Lee Lucas only killed 3 people. Adams is quoted as saying he believes Lucas was involved in more than 100 killings. And concerning the McLennan County murder cases, Adams is quoted as saying local authorities apparently had information about Lucas that they did not share with state officers. Ooh, there we go again, counter allegations.
Right.
It's your fault. If you had information that we were lying and doing something wrong, you should have told us. Well, we know how that goes. We've seen Henry's confession to Rita Salazar.
Right.
Well, I picked him up outside of Shreveport. No, that's not right, Henry. If you're going to keep saying Shreveport, I'm not going to be able to talk to you about this case. Oh, where was it? Remember, and finally brought him back around outside of Round Rock.
Round Rock.
Yeah, outside of Georgetown. So I think I say in one of the clips somewhere that giving the information back to the Rangers would have been like seeing that your chicken house has been broken into and asking the Fox to investigate how it happened.
Right.
Yeah.
The way that things are shaping up, that would be like suspecting the Fox of getting into the hen house and then asking the Fox to come and investigate it. I can't do that.
Thank you for listening to the Vic Feazell Show podcast. We're a primary source podcast. We talk about people we've known, things we've experienced. We're a Primary Source podcast. For more information, visit vicfeazell.com. Leave us a comment or a review. Subscribe to our YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook pages. And thank you for listening. Share us with your friends.
This is Texas singer-songwriter Brian Burns, and I've been to Waco, Hyco, Hondo, Navasota, Winsboro, Jacksboro, Hillsboro, Santa Rosa, Austin, Houston, Galveston, Texarkana, Frisco, Buffalo, Conroe, Corsicana, and that's just in the last week. Keep a safe pace, folks. Relax and drive laid back, because Texas is a laid-back place. And if you've been in a car wreck, call Vic Feazell at 877-WITH-VIC.
With principal offices in Waco and Austin, Texas.